All right, so you turn in your Bibles, we're in Genesis chapter 18 tonight. This is another one of those chapters I'm a huge fan of. And the list of those chapters are getting longer and longer. What's fascinating is we've got to spend a great deal of time with Abraham. We've got to look at Abraham and his faith, this man of faith as he was called out. And we kind of chronicled all of those steps and those keys to walking in the faith. We will do things similar as we've been moving through the book of Genesis with Abraham. And tonight we get kind of another inside look into an important aspect, not just to Abraham, but also to our walk. And in particular, the characteristics of a servant. And a lot of times we have a kind of a hard time nailing down what that looks like. And Abraham is a fantastic example. At this point in the Word, Abraham's about 100 years old. He would be essentially the leader of the family, not just for his, but we saw a couple weeks ago he still felt responsible for Lot. As we went through that chapter in the battle of the 9 kings, he still went after Lot, brought Lot back. Abraham has amassed a great deal of wealth all across the board. Typically when we think of wealth and riches, we think of silver and gold or money, some sort of a tangible financial security, but he also, as he left Mesopotamia, a great deal of flocks. And he held on to all of that and no doubt grew a great deal of that while he was in Haran. Then we moved down into Egypt and his short stay in Egypt before he was asked to leave by the Pharaoh. Remember that chapter. It says that he left with a great deal more. So about 25 years or so have amassed since him leaving Mesopotamia. And one of the things that makes him such a great example is even though he is in that, I guess for lack of better words, that higher position, we still get to see the servant's heart of Abraham. So that's where we're going to be picking up tonight. So, chapter 18, verse 1. Then the Lord appeared to him by the terebinth trees of Mamre as he was sitting in the tent door in the heat of the day. So he lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing by him. And when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the ground. So our section tonight picks up on Abraham sitting near the tent of the door in the heat of the day. That makes sense. In desert, hot regions, you do a lot of your work in the evening or in the early morning. You do a lot of your travel during the cooler hours. During the heat of the day, you just kind of wait it out. One of the first key aspects, and it's really the big question that should always be in front of us. Are you ready? The first key characteristic that we see with Abraham is that he is ready to worship. And that he is ready to serve. That's a hard one. We see kind of the spontaneity in Abraham here. He's looking outside. It's really hot. He's looking down at the ground. He looks back up. Now there's 3 men standing outside. It would have been easier to just do what? It's really hot out there. Shalom. Go your way in peace. He's not expecting it because nobody travels during the heat of the day, which is why it kind of lets us know what's going on in verse 1. It's not an expected thing. When it's time for us to serve, when it's time for us to worship, sometimes, often, it's expected. Some of your names are on the cleaning schedule, the cleaning rosters, the children's ministry rosters, some of you are slated for making coffee or bringing cookies or whatever it is. The list goes on and on for ministry or for worship. But sometimes it's not so easy. Well, I'm going to wait till I feel right before I start serving. Or I don't really, and we've been there, I don't really feel like worshiping right now. The problem is if you're waiting for it to feel right to start to worship or to feel right to start to serve, there's a very good chance you just might never do it. Because most of the time, the right time to serve, you don't feel like it. And it's similar, while I was still in that kind of condition, the days that I really did not want to go to the gym, or the days that I really did not want to train, those are the days that I got the most out of it. And if it's always based on feeling, well, now the enemy just kind of has a button to push. I don't really feel like worship. I don't really feel like service. What you should be really doing is doubting your feelings. And you'd be surprised of the outcome. So even in the heat of the day, we see Abram ready. And I really love all of the verbs that are kind of used to describe Abraham and Sarah in this chapter. So even though it's the heat of the day, he's not ready, he's not expecting travelers, and he's not expecting a visitation from God, which will really line us up. We'll kind of cover that more as we get into chapter 19 next week. But we see Jesus, as we saw in John and Timothy, nobody at any time has seen the form of the Father. He who has seen me has seen the Father. So what we're dealing with is probably a Christophany, a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ like we've dealt with in previous chapters. So he lifts his eyes and he sees those three men and he ran from the tent door. Love the action words. He's 100. And the word for ran is it's a pretty good literal definition. He got up and he boogied. He ran out there to meet them. It's the heat of the day, and how is it that he responds this way? Well, I think two reasons. First, he's ready. He's ready. He has a promise of God, and he's ready for what the Lord is doing. Two, and I think this is absolutely pivotal for us. It's not in the text, it's kind of my own opinion, but I believe full well that he recognizes him. This is not the first meeting, if you recall, this is not the first meeting that Abraham has had with the Lord. A lot of the times that stop us from service or stop us from being ready to worship is recognizing who he is, what he's doing, or that he's there to do a work. We don't recognize God in it. We don't see the Spirit in it. We let that ministry or that serving opportunity kind of slip through our fingers. But I believe that Abraham recognizes him and knows exactly who he is talking to. So he ran from the tent door to meet them, and he bowed himself to the ground. That word is the same word used for worship. How he's responding to the Lord being there. Abraham, 100 years old. I'm 37. If I lay down flat on the ground, somebody else will have to come get me because I'm stuck there more often than not. Abraham is 100 years old. Abraham is in a much higher place of authority, not than the Lord, obviously, but where he is the master of his household. He's a very wealthy man. He's a very powerful individual. You remember when I can't remember what chapter it is all of a sudden, we're talking about the Battle of the 9 Kings, and one guy got away from Sodom being captured, and he had to go give a message to Abram the Hebrew. People know who he is. When people know who you are, you're more reluctant to do the bowing and expecting the bow instead. Probably not. Probably not. That would be my best guess. But it does bring us around to another amazing point. In Hebrews, many have entertained angels without even knowing it. But here in the text, we see that Abram knows exactly who he's dealing with. And we see Abram ready to worship. But we also see Abram in this place of humility. He understands who he is in the presence of God. He understands that his blessings came from God. So the first key characteristics of a servant, one is that we are ready. We can only be ready by being in the Word, by being in prayer, by being in fellowship. And two, we see him not just ready to worship, but also we see him in a place of humility. And said, "My Lord." So again, he recognizes him. "If I have now found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant." Man, I love that. The third characteristic, and something that is important for being a servant, is to remember who you are serving. When we serve in the body, in the church, or we're serving in the community, and you're serving people, you're going to get smoked. You're going to get burnt out. Why? Because people aren't always as appreciative as you would like them to be. As soon as they stop being appreciative, or they stop being grateful, they stop giving the little hat tip at the end of whatever's taking place, we no longer feel the desire to serve. However, when we are serving the Lord, it brings us to something else even more incredible. "If I have now found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant." When we find favor in somebody's sight, what's typically the first thing that goes through our minds? Well, I'm going to get something. As you read through, especially like the Word, those who have found favor in the sight of the king, we see him shortly thereafter being rewarded with something, or eating at the king's table, or being granted land, whatever it is. So we find favor in somebody's sight. The fleshly nature can come out and is, okay, what's in it for me? What am I going to get out of this situation? I really like Abraham's heart here. If he has found favor in the sight of the Lord, think about it. If you have found favor in the sight of the Lord, what would you ask for? What's the first thing that pops into your mind? It almost brings us back to the concept of Solomon when he was in his youth. And he had favor or grace in God's eyes. God said, "Whatever you want, I'll give it to you." Solomon could have literally, you get one thing to ask for, whatever it is you want, you're going to get that. Solomon, of course, asked for wisdom to lead his people. Abram now has favor. He's asking if he has found favor or grace in the eyes of God. What does Abraham ask for? Fellowship. How incredible is that? Especially when we get burnt out on our walk. Lord, this is what I need. We've been there. Some of us are still there. I'm not saying it's inherently a bad thing. It is a flesh thing. Lord, I need more time. Lord, I need more money. God, I need a better car. Lord, I need this thorn in my flesh to go away. And the list from the big things to the small things is never ending. I like where his heart and his mindset is at. Lord, what I need is, he's 100. What do you need when you're 100? 50 years shaved off? More vitality? Or more stuff? Abraham asks for time. Please don't leave. Man, I love that. We have, or we're supposed to have, this general sense that God is always around us, that the Spirit of God is in us. But it doesn't stop us from doing things we know we shouldn't do. We lash out, we sin, we get cranky, we cheat the scales a little bit, or steal a Tootsie Roll from whatever it is that's your vice. But you notice that people act differently when they're standing in front of somebody they know to be filled with the Spirit, or they know to be righteous. Sometimes in your flesh, it's like, man, you can go now so I can watch, my rated R movie, or finish my beer, or whatever it is that makes you uncomfortable. Whenever we have a kind of a thing of uncomfort, we want to push that thing aside. Abraham is inviting God to stay with him. How amazing is that one? How important it is to maintain, to desire, to just hunger for fellowship with God. When you hunger for fellowship with man, you will get a little bit here and there. You'll get nothing but empty promises from the world. Or you might get let down. But 100% every time, and we see that promise in Jeremiah, you seek me with all of your heart, you will find me. That is what we really should be desiring. It says, do not pass by your servant. Please let a little water be brought and wash your feet and rest yourself under the tree. So we see Abraham in this place of hospitality. But what I really like is the pleading at the beginning of the verse. Please let. What's Abraham asking for? Please let me serve. That's incredible. Man, I just love the heart of Abraham. Often it's, please don't pick me. Please don't ask for a volunteer. Please don't let the pastor look my way, because he knows that I know how to paint or garden or manage and contain children or whatever it is. Just don't let him look my way. And I do feel bad about it often, because people in there discussing things with me is like, oh, I'm an electrician. Oh, I do, security stuff. I do, whatever, X, Y, and Z. He's like, oh, noted. I'll find you after the service. So we got some stuff to talk about. Abraham, at 100 years old. How tired are we now? We're not 100 years old. He is begging to serve. That is probably one of the most distinguishable marks of the Christian faith. At least it's supposed to be. We serve out of the abundance of love that is poured into us. We serve somehow. We serve God and we serve people. Loving God, loving people. That is the highest mark of the Christian faith, of the mature Christian faith. Because it's abnormal, unless you're really bored or you just don't want to go home, it is abnormal to beg to serve. And Abraham is seizing every opportunity to serve. Why? Because he loves God. 3 places in the Word it tells us that Abraham is a friend of God. And here he is asking, Lord, please stay. It looks like you're going someplace, which they are. They're making their way towards Sodom, which we'll get to later on in this chapter. Maybe. He's seizing every opportunity to serve. He's not being hindered because it's not a matter of feeling. Nobody feels. Megan and I, we lived in the desert for 12 years, 13 years. Not too far from Death Valley. It's hot. It's miserable. Nothing grows. Everything dies. Water's more precious than gold, the whole bit. And because I'm a genius, I bought us a house that had no air conditioning. You don't really feel like doing anything. When the weekend gets here, oh, babe, what do you want to do today? Want to go do some yard work? Mm-hmm. That's why we'd go sit on the beach so much. Way better weather. If you don't feel like serving, you're probably not going to serve. And I will bring a morsel of bread that you may refresh your hearts. After that you may pass by, inasmuch as you have come to your servant. They said, do as you have said. One of the key aspects to a characteristic or a heart of a servant is if you identify as a servant. The question kind of comes up, well, how do I know that I'm going to be, how do I know I'm a servant? And as much as you have said, do it. You know you're a servant when people start treating you like a servant. And that just really goes against the grain, doesn't it? It used to come up a lot in my household when I try and make my mother do things for me. Do I look like your servant? And you wouldn't dare answer the question. But as a Christian, you're supposed to. Yes, you do. Yes, you do look like a servant. Abraham at 100 years old, at the tippy top of his respective food chain, and he identifies himself as a servant. If we identify with Christ as servants, you're probably going to be more likely to serve, would be my guess. So they said, do as you have said. So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah and said, "Quickly, make ready 3 measures of fine meal, knead it, and make cakes." And Abraham ran to the herd, took a tender and good calf, gave it to a young man, and he hastened to prepare it. So we could see a couple of things in these 2 verses. First, notice all the action words. I love those action words. Again, we're probably going to say it a lot tonight. He's 100. He's got a whole lot of fire in his giddy-up, and he is moving. What else I really like about Abraham, because he identifies as a servant, look what Abraham is doing. He is participating in the service. We don't know how many servants Abraham had. We do know at least he had 318 men. As we saw a few chapters ago, he had 318 men raised in his house, trained, and those are the ones he took with him to retrieve his wayward nephew. He could have clapped his hands, snapped his fingers, as we can, often for some of us, but instead, Abraham chooses to put his hands into the pot, and he is personally serving, even though he doesn't have to. He's still doing it. He's allowing himself, he's making himself able, he's setting himself up for success because he identifies himself as a servant of God. And he invites his wife into the process. That's awesome. A husband and wife team in the ministry is absolutely powerful, which is why the enemy tries so fiercely to interrupt the covenant of marriage. He invites his wife into it. If you're unmarried, invite a friend. Many hands make light work. So he ran to the herd, took a tender and good calf, and he hastened to prepare it. So Abraham now goes to the herd. So initially he's like, okay, I want to make you guys, I'm going to get you something to drink. We're going to make you some cakes. That way it can just kind of bring some nourishment back into you, and you can go about your way. Abraham goes a step further, and now he's taking an animal from his own flocks, his own herds. So we see him going the extra step, and now we see Abraham pulling from his, I guess for lack of better words, his personal inventory. What is the importance of his herds? They feed him, they feed his family, and it's probably also a matter of business. Buy, sell, trade, it's still a booming business now. Abraham does not hesitate to pull something precious in service of the Lord. Kind of a fascinating concept. So the first question is, why does he not hesitate? Let's make it personal for us. Let's talk about tithes. It's our favorite thing to talk about. When we tithe, it hurts a little bit. Most of us, we don't make that much money. And we try to stick to the 10% ordeal or love offerings, plus we have other gifts going out to wherever. When you see your money kind of slip away that you worked so hard for, you see, well, man, that's gas money. What if I need that to buy more groceries? What happens with these bills? Abraham would have been faced with the same challenges. Maybe not so much a power and gas bill, but he certainly had money going in and money going out. I have no doubt in my mind Abraham goes back to that promise and the conversation that he had with the Lord, that he is his shield. So Abraham doesn't need the money to defend himself. And his exceedingly great reward. Abraham doesn't need it for the blessing. The blessing is in the giving to the Lord. And what's interesting is he's giving and he's not really getting anything back. We've seen similar teachings in Jesus' ministry. Give out, invite to suffer without expectation of reciprocation. And another concept of the good calf. I really like that. He didn't bring the worst to God, but instead he chose the best. The best is important, especially as time goes on. The best was very important. when it came time to take your offering, your lamb or whatever it is, to the temple, they would just inspect it. It looked like a car show. They're making sure this thing was all put together properly, without spot, without blemish, without any issues. If it wasn't the right one, they'd tell you to get out of there. You could buy a different one. So we see as time has gone on, the value put into those things. But it would have been easy for Abraham to be like, okay, well, this is God. He can do anything, with anything. He doesn't need the best. He's going to get that sickly one. I can't sell it. I can't really do much with it. It's going to be horrible for breeding stock, so he's going to get that weird one. Abraham doesn't do it. It doesn't even say in the text that he debated about it. He went and grabbed a good one. He went and grabbed the best one, and that is what he presented to the Lord. He presented the better portion. In our giving, it should hurt a little. You should feel it. At least at that point in time, you know you're doing it right. Because you are relying on God to be your shield. You are relying on God to be your exceedingly great reward. David has a similar experience. In 1 Chronicles chapter 21, verses 22 through 24, and this is David speaking to Ornan. Then David said to Ornan, "Grant me the place of this threshing floor, that I may build an altar on it to the Lord. You shall grant it to me at the full price." We'll discuss that in a sec. "That the plague may be withdrawn from the people." But Ornan said to David, "Take it to yourself, and let my lord the king do what is good in his eyes. Look, I also give you the oxen for the burnt offerings, the threshing implements for wood, and the wheat for the grain offering. I give it all." Then King David said to Ornan, "No, but I will surely buy it for the full price, for I will not take what is yours for the Lord, nor offer burnt offerings with that which costs me nothing." What a powerful concept. So you have Ornan, who owns a threshing floor. Threshing floors were incredibly important. They had to be just right. There's a little hilly area that could catch the wind, so they're separating the wheat from the chaff. They would throw it up in the air. The wind would blow away the chaff, and the grain would fall to the ground. If you were trying to do it in a slope, you're just a weirdo throwing food in the air all day long. So they would go to the threshing floor, this higher place that could do that. These also became important places of false worship, of idolatry. We remember, especially in the northern kingdom, Israel, after the split, the king didn't want the Israelites, so those from the north, going back to the south, where Jerusalem was in Judah, to worship. So he decided to make it easy. He put 2 golden calves, one in the north and one in the south. But then on the threshing floors, they put idols. So while they worked, they could also kind of worship, making it nice and easy. Not only did he have this threshing floor, which is important for Ornan, he said, "I will give you my oxen so you can use them for the burnt sacrifices." Oh, you don't have wood. All these threshing tools. Use those for the wood. Take all the grain in the threshing floor. Use that for the grain offering. What's the first thing that would jump through our minds? God is good. He's provided all this stuff. I'm not saying it's always one or the other, because we have absolutely seen God provide that way. But David, in this thing to the Lord, he wasn't going to offer it up that didn't cost him anything. Paying full run for the threshing floor, the land, and for the oxen for the sacrifice. Abraham, what we also see here with David, gives the very best. So he took butter and milk and the calf which he had prepared and set it before them, and he stood by them under the tree as they ate. He still kept himself in a place of service. He wasn't eating. He was standing by as they were eating. Why does it say that in the Word? In case they needed something else. He was ready to serve. Then they said to him, "Where is Sarah, your wife?" So he said, "Here in the tent." And he said, "I will certainly return to you according to the time of life. And behold, Sarah, your wife, shall have a son." Sarah was listening in the tent door, which was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old. Really like how point Just to the point, the Bible is sometimes. Well advanced in age, and Sarah had passed the age of childbearing. Her womb was just absolutely not, there was no way they were going to have a kid. Therefore, Sarah laughed within herself, saying, after I have grown old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord being old also. So she's also to the point, to establish that she's not the only one that's old. So now we see the Lord doing something interesting. He's kind of honing in, he's zeroing in on Sarah. He asks a question to Abraham, which again promotes one of those studies that we're not going to be able to get into tonight. But why does God ask the question he already knows the answer to? He's asking Abraham, knowing that Sarah is in earshot. What a teachable moment for the two of them. Sarah's not out there with Abraham. Instead, she's kind of eavesdropping a little bit. And the Lord takes advantage of the situation. He said, I will certainly return according to the time of life. And behold, Sarah, your wife, shall have a son. So the Lord is saying to Abraham, I'm going to return at that time of life. I'm going to return at that time of regeneration, which is really what we see in Abraham and Sarah. Both of them, as far as childbearing or even rearing goes, their flesh is dead. It's what the writer of Hebrews tells us. Flesh is completely dead. There's no possible way they can have a child without God. For the glory of God. He's saying, I'm going to return. What really fascinates me is why the reiteration of the promise so soon. Did you pick up on that one as we were reading through the text? When we left off with Abraham last time, the Lord said at this time next year, Sarah will be pregnant. She's not pregnant in chapter 18. So there's a short gap between chapter 17 and 18, and the Lord is already reiterating the promise. Guzik points out why the repetition of the promise so soon. He goes back to Romans chapter 10, verse 17. That faith comes by what? Hearing. Abraham probably really needed to hear the promise again. We get caught up often. And we choose not to hear the promise because we choose not to read the promise. All the amazing things, Psalm 119, especially one of Megan's favorites, of how it speaks about the word the Word of God and what it does for us. I'm more of a foodie, so I hone in on those promises and say, I found the Word of the Lord and it was good and I ate it. Such nourishment we get from the Word, and yet we avoid it. So I feel that God is using the repetition of the promise here so soon as something to encourage Abraham. We don't know what the time span is, but he's been waiting for 25 years. And then at some point in time, shortly ago that we saw in chapter 17, he said, this time next year, Sarah will be pregnant. Can you imagine kind of chomping it? Finally it's getting here. Finally it's getting here. And the closer something seems, man, does it not feel so far away. And yet we see God in a place of encouraging Abraham. Therefore, Sarah laughed within herself, saying, after I have grown old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord being old also? And the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh? So this laugh of Sarah, this is kind of an internal laugh. It's not a very good one. This is more of a chide or a sarcastic laugh. This is a laugh of unbelief. We saw in Romans that Abraham did not waver at the promise. When Abraham laughed, the chapter before, that was a laugh of joy. Very much looking forward to the promise. Sarah's laugh, less about joy. How do we know that? The Lord didn't rebuke Abraham, but he did Sarah. Sarah is coming from a place of, and it's easy to point the fingers at, well, she's at a place of unbelief. Yes. And it would be easy, Sarah. Man, she'd have left her name as Sarai, contentious. not princess, not Sarah. Look at her unbelief. I can't believe God gave her anything. One, we get to see the amazing, just God's grace. But two, Sarah is also probably coming from a place of hurt. Says, after I've grown old, shall I have pleasure, and my Lord being old also. So we do see disbelief, but you can also kind of feel the pain that is in there. The Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I surely bear a child, since I am old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time I will return to you according to the time of life, and Sarah shall have a son. But Sarah denied it, saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid. And he said, no, but you did laugh. I really like that. And as last week we broke down Mark chapter 2 for our inductive Bible study class, we saw the scribes reasoning in their hearts the blasphemies, right? And we see Jesus answering them before it was probably even a full thought. We see the same thing here. So we see a couple of amazing things. First, God hears. We saw several chapters ago with Hagar, Bir Laharoi, the God who sees. And now we see that God hears. So there's no sense in denying it. He sees your place of unbelief. He sees your place of disobedience. On the other side of the coin, he sees your faith. He sees your belief. He sees your obedience. Let's go deeper. He sees your pain. He sees your hopes. He sees your fears. So be in fellowship with God. If he already sees these things, which means he's not surprised, you might as well go to him boldly before the throne. And two, another important aspect and characteristic to the servant. My friends, it's time for us to cast off shackles of limitations, assumed limitations on God. She's 100. She's not 100. She's about 90. He's 100. There's no way we can have a kid. You remember in Genesis chapter 1, and the Lord, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Created. Bara in the Hebrew, which means to create something out of nothing. He can create all this stuff, but I can't have a baby. He can part the Red Sea, but he can't help me with this bill. He can't help me with X, Y, and Z. And most of our X, Y's, and Z's are really, really little. And we won't give it to God. Or it's like, well, I've disappointed God. The only way to disappoint somebody is to shock somebody. And if you think you're shocking God, then you don't understand who God is, what God is. We need to cast off those limitations. One of those big limitations, especially in the aspect of the servant. Often we get the mouth of Moses. We remember that one in the book of Exodus. Moses spent 40 years with the Pharaoh, struck down an Egyptian, freaked out, and he left. Spent 40 years, I think it was Midian, as a shepherd. And God appears to him in the burning bush. Hey, you're going to go back and you're going to tell Pharaoh, let my people go. What's Moses do? Lord, I can't do that. I have unclean lips. My lips don't work right. I have uncircumcised lips, unskilled at speaking. He can't talk right, so God can't possibly use him. We do that. We assume our limitations stop God. We have to remove those shackles. Everybody has something dumb or weird or hard. I can't talk, I can't walk, I can't fight, I can't roll around, I can't drive properly, I can't whatever. God has still gifted you as a believer to use that gift for the benefit of the body. But you are never going to use that gift if you continue to put limitations on everything. If God has called you to do something and it's something weird, that weird part, that's odds are God's in it. Because God is a huge fan of weird. So he rebukes Sarah. Then the men rose from there and looked toward Sodom. And Abraham went with them to send them on their way. So the two men get up. They start making their way to Sodom. We'll see in chapter 19 that those two men are angels. And it's important to make sure you read the whole text. There's a lot of people who teach that the persons that were at Abraham's tent was the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. A lot of people teach it. Chapter 19, now the two angels came too. They're two angels. Two are angels, one is not. So these men, they get up, Abraham gets up and goes with them. And the Lord said, and I really love this part, shall I hide from Abraham what I am doing? There's a lot of debate over that. Who's he talking to? Two of them left, Abraham's right behind them. Why is it in the passage? Who's he talking to? Who's saying it? Who's the counsel with? You can beat that one up all you want to. Here's my opinion. God has preserved and put that in his word to reveal his thinking to us. So it really gives kind of a powerful insight. So he said, shall I hide from Abraham what I am doing? Since Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. For I have known him, in order that he may command his children and his household after him, that they keep the way of the Lord, to do righteousness and justice, that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has spoken to him. So we have a couple of neat aspects to it. Why would God reveal his plans to Abraham? We're going to see in this chapter that God is revealing his plans to Abraham to draw something out of Abraham. That's why I really like the questions that God asks, that Jesus asks. You remember in Genesis chapter 3 at the garden, Adam, where are you? It's not that God is terrible at hide and seek, but God wants Adam to consider, where are you? Why are you hiding from my presence? What is it that put you there hiding in the bushes with fig leaves around your tenders? The questions are important. So we see, one, that God is going to be drawing, that the Lord is going to be drawing something out of Abraham. But I really like how Jesus put it in the New Testament to the disciples, the founders of the church. You see, I have told you everything. You are my friends. How incredible. Friends of God want to know the will of God. Servants of God want to know the will of God. Why? We have servants here. All of us are supposed to be servants here. People ask me all the time, what do you want me to do? And I'll answer it. Because if someone comes in serving without knowing what they're supposed to be doing, what's going to happen? Sanctuary might be a different color. It's like, oh, these plants are too tall, we'll cut them off at the stalk. What's trash and what isn't trash? Servants want to know the will of God. Why? So they can fulfill the will of God. Why? Because they love God. They serve out of that love. And how God loves them. He loved us first. In this aspect, in context, a couple of things for Abraham. First, not only are all the nations of the earth going to be blessed through Abraham's lineage, i.e. what? The Messiah. The Messiah was going to come from the lineage of Abraham. But it goes further than that in verse 19. That he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord. So Abraham is going to bless through his lineage, but he's also going to bless the world through his household. And that is our function as parents, grandparents, community leaders, raising up that next generation in the Lord so that they can go forward and bless the world. And the Lord said, speaking to Abraham, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grave. I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry against it that has come to me, and if not, I will know. Again, written for our benefit, showing that God does not unjustly judge. And that's a concept that we get. We've been hammering that one actually quite a bit the last several months. What does spark my interest is the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah. Whose outcry? You ever wonder about that one? Like, it's an unnamed figure. There's an outcry somewhere. Just going to throw it out there. The New Testament calls Lot what? Righteous Lot. Now, as we read through Genesis, we don't really see righteous Lot. We see dirtbag Lot. That's how we immediately kind of assess the situation. But we know that Lot was sitting at the gates. Very well could have been Lot praying about Sodom and Gomorrah. Just something to think about. Then the men turned away from there and went toward Sodom, but Abraham still stood before the Lord. The Lord stayed with Abraham. The two men went walking towards Sodom. Abraham stayed close to God. Sodom and Gomorrah? Yes. Yep, we'll read about them next week because we are not making it this week. And Abraham came near and said, "Would you also destroy the righteous with the wicked?" A couple of important aspects. I'm going to go with three of them. We do see Abraham kind of stepping into wanting just a deeper relationship with God. Why? I've learned a lot of hard lessons. Some of them I'm still trying to learn. If you're dealing with, please don't take this the wrong way, if you're dealing with an angry woman or just an angry individual, sometimes it's best not to pursue or stand too close. It's just food for thought. It's a good way to get lashed out at or hit with something. If the Lord is sending two angels to wipe out a city, how close do you want to get? We always hear, well, I like the God of the New Testament. He's so kind and fluffy, and he's gentle compared to the God of the Old Testament. It's like, dude, you have not read all the New Testament that I've read. And I would wager you see far more pictures of grace in the Old Testament than you do in the New Testament. We'll continue to point those out as we go forward. But Abraham decides to draw near and do what? Abraham decides to draw near to God and act as an intercessor. Why? Because there might be someone righteous in Sodom. Who else is in Sodom? Lot's in Sodom. Abraham, quite naturally, still feels responsible for Lot. And two angels, two dudes, not dudes, angels, are going to go down and smote an entire two cities. That's a lot. And Abraham's going to draw near to God, and he asks that question, would you also destroy the righteous with the wicked? What is the answer to that? No. Hence this period of intercession. That question is important. Why? How often do we discuss the debates between pre-tribulation, mid-tribulation, and post-tribulation theorem? Often. We have a lot of people that really think, well, the church is going to go halfway through the tribulation. Well, the church is going to go all the way through the tribulation, and then, we'll have our share in glory and inheritance afterwards. Based off of one verse, but not the entire text. Even just not going off the entire text. Because Abraham doesn't have it. Abraham doesn't have all of this that we have. Abraham knows that God knows how to separate the righteous from the guilty, to disperse wrath on the one and blessing on the other. Obviously, it's if you would, a non-essential, so it's not a matter of your salvation. But the question I always ask to somebody that asks me those theories is like, is that the heart of God? To pour out wrath, punishment, indignation onto the righteous. It doesn't even make sense in the same sentence. So he asked that question. I will point this out. Two things. The next two key characteristics to the servant. First, seventh. First of these two characteristics, prayer. Prayer. We have an always open door to God who sees us and hears us. Use it. Pray. Especially that role of the intercessor. And you notice before he steps into that place of intercession, what does he do? First, he draws near to God. He moved closer to the Lord before he started with the intercession. Why? Because it's hard for us to intercede with a fleshly heart. We need his heart for intercession. Because most of the time our intercession is, Lord, if you could just smote him a little bit, I think it would really correct the situations going on over there. We don't really know how to intercede without the heart of God. And we see Abraham with a very important principle. Draw near to the Lord. Not just for intercession, but I would say draw near to the Lord, especially for prayer. So verse 24, suppose there were 50 righteous within the city. Would you also destroy the place and not spare it for the 50 righteous that were in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing as this, to slay the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous should be as the wicked. Kind of goes back to our previous conversation a little bit, doesn't it? Shall not the judge of all the earth do right? So the Lord said, if I find in Sodom 50 righteous within the city, then I will spare all the place for their sakes. So God agrees. If I find 50 righteous, I'll spare it. What's Abraham do? Then Abraham answered and said, indeed now, I who am but dust and ashes, have taken upon myself to speak to the Lord. Remember, he's speaking to the Lord as he's saying this. Suppose there were 5 less than 50 righteous. Would you destroy all the city for lack of 5? So he said, if I find there 45, I will not destroy it. And he spoke to him yet again and said, suppose there should be 40 found there. So he said, I will not destroy it for the sake of 40. Then he said, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak. Suppose 30 should be found there. So he said, I will not destroy it if I find 30. And he said, indeed, I have taken it upon myself to speak to the Lord. Suppose 20 should be found there. So he said, I will not destroy it for the sake of 20. Then he said, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak but once more. Suppose 10 should be found there. And he said, I will not destroy it for the sake of 10. Maybe a little bit of nervousness on Abraham's part. This is not a role that he's used to. This is the first time we see him really doing this. The last time we saw him as interceding, we saw him do it through physical action when he went after Lot. Now we see him interceding for Lot through prayer. 50 righteous in the city is so bad. Obviously, Abraham knows how bad it is. 50 righteous. I won't spare it. I will spare it if there's 50 righteous. 45. And we see kind of the talk going down. A lot of people, unfortunately, see this as Abraham trying to put God in a corner and Abraham trying to get his will imposed upon God. But we're going to see as we finish the text that's not the case. So now let's talk about effective prayer, at least in context to this section. The first one, do you know who God is? That will change the way you pray. Do you know who God is? Abraham does. Abraham knows that God is righteous. Abraham knows that God is just. Abraham seems to know God's heart. He's praying on God's characteristics. He's not reminding God of his own characteristics. That would be kind of foolish. But he's going to stand on them and pray. Do we know God's characteristics? How do we know God's characteristics? Well, I feel like God is, insert your own adjective. It's a problem with that sentence. We're going right back to feeling when it's in here. All of the batty nonsense that we see involving this and teachers and pastors and churches, well, I feel like God would have done. It's like, yeah, but I know what he did in this text. I know what he says in here. Truth, feeling, and the heart being incredibly deceitful, lies. It's not about feeling, it's about faith. We are not going to know the characteristics of God if we're not reading about the characteristics of God that he has given to us. And 2, we need to know who we are before God. This isn't Abraham stepping forward in a name it and claim it situation. I've said it out loud. I've prayed. It's mine. It doesn't work that way. We still see the humility of Abraham in the presence of God, don't we? Please, Lord, don't be angry with me as I ask one more time. Lord, I know what I'm made of. I'm made of dirt and ash. But please hear me. And he does. So we still see humility in Abraham. But what else do we also see kind of mingled with that one? I have taken it upon myself to talk to the Lord. So Abraham, while still being humble, is also being what? Bold. What an odd mixture, isn't it? But obviously it can be done. I have this written down in my Bible, but I didn't say it, so I don't know who said it. Prayer is not getting our will done in heaven. It is not trying to change God's mind. It's getting God's will done on earth. patching into God's plan and being a part of the process. And we see that kind of expounded upon in James chapter 4, verse 3. Again, I don't know who said it, but I wrote it down for whatever reason. I didn't write somebody's name next to it. God is drawing this intercessory role out of Abraham. How do we know that? Verse 33, so the Lord went his way as soon as he had finished speaking with Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. We see that it was God's plan all along, bringing Abraham in. Prayer does change things, but another aspect of prayer, and it is very hard for us to marry the two concepts, another important aspect of prayer is it invites us along with God's plan to understand what it is that God is doing. Why is God trying to bring this concept of the intercessor out of Abraham? I really love this part. In Romans 8:29, it says we are going to be conformed to the image of the Son. And in Hebrews 7, verse 25, we see Jesus as an intercessor. In Revelation, I believe it's Revelation chapter 12, we still see Jesus as an intercessor because the enemy is at the throne day and night accusing the brethren. Why is God doing something weird in your life? Because you're being conformed to the image of his Son. Intercession is not something that comes typically natural for us. Intercession for a family member? You bet. Intercession for a good friend? Absolutely. Intercession for the guy that cut you off on the freeway? It's not intercession. That's vengeance. But we see Jesus all through the Word interceding for us, not while we were the best of characters, but dirtbags. What could Abraham have done? Lord, I see you're sending those two guys to Sodom. I warned Lot. That was a bad town. He's got it coming. So, good luck. We don't see Abraham doing that, do we? We see Abraham interceding because he is being conformed to the image. Abraham's been playing this game for over 25 years. And what's fascinating is he hasn't grown tired of it. He sees the Lord for the X amount of time. We've kind of lost track by now. He runs out of the tent to meet him. He's 100 years old. He runs out of the tent and prostrates himself before God. It is my prayer that we remain in that kind of fire, that kind of life as a body to serve. The last point that I would close with, often we really come to a dry place in our faith, a dry place in our walk. We kind of come to this desert. It's hot, it's dry, nothing seems to be growing. Not a lot of stuff grows in the desert. Stuff that does grow in the desert, most of it you can't eat. Or it's trying to eat you. Deserts are fun. And we get the question often, this is where I'm at in my walk. Why? The first thing I ask, typically the first thing I ask is, are you reading and praying every day? And typically I get the answer of, absolutely. Like, good. What are you doing with it? Are you serving? One of those key marks of the Christian faith. Are we serving? While you hold the answer to that one, I guess the better question is, are you ready to serve? Are you setting yourself up for success to do exactly that? Let's pray together. Lord, thank you so much for blessing our evening. And thank you so much, Lord, for the fire that is in us. And I pray, God, that fire would always be stirred up and added to. That it would spread. That we see in your word, Lord, as the waters, the Spirit, your Spirit is poured into us, that we see it flowing out from us, affecting others. Lord, we have a lot of things that stop us from fully coming to you. Fear, circumstance,